There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard. It comes from waiting, from doing everything right and still feeling suspended in between, not rejected, not chosen, just pending. For 6 months, Daniel Harper didn't miss a single follow-up. Every proposal was clean, every appraisal was solid, and still no contract, no rejection, no explanation, just the same sentence, again and again. "We like your work. Let's circle back." This wasn't bad luck. It wasn't timing. And it wasn't a lack of skill. It was more like trying to hold water in a clenched hand. And this is where almost everyone recognizes themselves. When something truly matters, your career, your money, your future, the instinct is to try harder, to stay on top of it, to control every variable you can reach. It feels responsible. It feels disciplined. It feels like what serious people are supposed to do, but it's the same motion. The tighter the fist, the faster the water slips through. The effort is sincere. The intention is right. And yet the result keeps moving further away. What most people never notice is that nothing is going wrong in moments like this. The grip itself becomes the interference. Not because you care too much, but because caring turns into tightening, and tightening changes the signal. And the real question isn't how to want less. It's how to learn to hold differently. At 6:30 a.m., Daniel sat in his car outside a single-story home in Phoenix. Desert light just beginning to stretch across the pavement. The appraisal was finished. The numbers were accurate. The report had already been uploaded. There was nothing left to improve. Still, he hadn't started the engine. His laptop rested on the passenger seat. An email draft glowed softly on the screen. Following up appraisal vendor partnership. He reread the subject line, then read it again more slowly, as if the right cadence might finally make something move. Daniel had been an independent real estate appraiser for over a decade, reliable, precise, trusted. But for the last 6 months, he'd been reaching for one specific shift, a long-term vendor agreement with a regional bank. One contract that would stabilize his workflow, double his monthly volume, and finally quiet the low-level tension that never seemed to turn off. On paper, he was doing everything right. He followed up politely. He responded quickly. He accepted rush jobs without complaint. He revised reports at no charge. He stayed in the posture of holding. The strange thing about flow is this: the tighter you try to hold it, the faster it escapes. Not because you did anything wrong, but because water doesn't respond to force. It responds to space. Daniel didn't realize it yet, but he was doing the same thing with his future. The more he needed the contract to land so he could relax, the more his body tightened around it. His shoulders stayed slightly raised. His breathing stayed shallow. His attention kept leaning forward into what hasn't happened yet. None of this showed up in his emails, but all of it showed up in his signal. Because people don't respond only to words. They respond to state, to timing, to the subtle difference between someone who is offering value and someone who needs an outcome. That difference is almost invisible, almost. And it changes everything. Daniel began noticing the symptoms without naming them. Refreshing his inbox without realizing it. Listening for his phone even when it was silent. Drafting follow-ups in his head while brushing his teeth. Sleeping lightly. Waking already ahead of himself. Nothing was wrong with his strategy. But something was gripping too tightly around it. Sitting there in the car, Daniel felt the familiar urge to send the email anyway. Action felt safer than stillness. Doing something felt better than doing nothing, especially when nothing felt like falling behind. But for the first time, another awareness surfaced beneath the urge. Nothing is wrong with my work. Nothing is missing from my skill set. Something is off with how tightly I'm holding this. He closed the laptop instead of hitting send. That moment didn't change his circumstances. The contract hadn't arrived. The inbox was still quiet. But something inside him softened. Just enough. And when the grip loosens, the flow changes. The less you try to force water to stay in your hand, the longer it remains. The less you chase an outcome from need, the faster it finds you. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped squeezing. Daniel didn't know what to call this yet. He only knew that pushing harder hadn't moved anything, and for the first time in months, he was willing to try something different. Not a new strategy, a different grip. What Daniel didn't expect was how familiar this feeling had become. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a constant, low-grade alertness humming beneath everything he did. It followed him through his days so quietly that he mistook it for discipline, for professionalism, for caring about his future. But care, he was starting to notice, had slowly turned into vigilance. Even when there was nothing to fix, nothing to send, nothing to improve, his attention stayed angled forward, toward the next response, the next update, the next sign that things were finally moving. His body behaved as if something important might slip away the moment he relaxed. That posture didn't begin with this contract. It had been trained into him over years. Show initiative, stay responsive, anticipate needs. Never be the reason momentum stalls, and for most of his career, that approach worked. It built trust, it built referrals, it built a reputation. What it didn't build was ease. Somewhere along the line, success became something he had to actively hold in place, like a fragile structure that needed constant reinforcement. If he paused too long, followed up too late, or stopped proving his value, he feared it would quietly collapse. Yet here he was, doing all of that perfectly, and watching the result remain suspended. The contradiction was subtle but unsettling. Effort was high, skill was solid, integrity was intact. And still, reality wasn't responding with the clarity he expected. Not yes, not no, just delay. That's when the realization began to form. Not as a conclusion, but as a question that refused to leave him alone. What if the problem isn't effort? What if it's the state the effort is coming from? Daniel had never considered that distinction before. He evaluated actions, outcomes, metrics, timelines. But he rarely examined the internal posture underneath them, the emotional tone he carried into every interaction, the unspoken urgency embedded in his responsiveness, the subtle tension in his body when an outcome mattered too much. He started noticing small things, how his breathing shortened when he thought about the bank, how his attention drifted away from the present moment toward imagined futures, how even moments of rest felt provisional, as if he hadn't fully earned them yet. None of this meant he was desperate. That word felt too extreme. It was closer to dependency, the quiet belief that once this one thing landed, everything else could finally settle. And that belief, he was beginning to sense, was shaping more than his thoughts. It was shaping his signal. Because people don't only respond to competence, they respond to coherence, to whether someone feels grounded in themselves or subtly leaning on the outcome to feel stable. That difference doesn't announce itself. It leaks out in timing, tone, pacing, presence. Daniel hadn't lost alignment with his work. He had lost neutrality around the result. And neutrality, he was starting to understand, wasn't indifference. It was steadiness. It was the ability to offer value without internally bargaining for relief in return. It was the difference between standing firmly in your role and hovering just slightly ahead of yourself. Sitting there that morning, Daniel didn't suddenly know what to do next. There was no breakthrough strategy, no inspired idea, no sudden optimism, just a quiet recognition. If the outcome needed him to be tight, it would never arrive relaxed. And if it required him to stay braced, it would never feel stable even when it did. So instead of fixing, he paused. Instead of following up, he waited. Not as a tactic, but as an experiment in holding his position without leaning forward. The world didn't change in that moment, but he did. And that shift, subtle, internal, almost unnoticeable, was the real beginning of everything that followed. Daniel assumed the problem was outside him. But the interference wasn't in the contract, the timing, or the bank. It was happening inside his nervous system long before any decision was made. What Daniel was brushing up against wasn't a mindset problem, and it wasn't a motivational issue. It was a biological and energetic mismatch between intention and internal state. From the outside, he wanted stability. From the inside, his body behaved as if stability hadn't arrived yet. The nervous system doesn't run on your goals or your affirmations. It runs on threat appraisal, the brain's constant, mostly unconscious evaluation of one question. Am I safe right now? When an outcome starts to feel tied to security money, stability, approval, survival. The system doesn't necessarily panic. Instead, it upshifts into vigilance, a low-grade readiness state designed to prevent loss. Not fear, not anxiety, just a subtle tightening that says, stay alert, physiologically. This shift is precise. The sympathetic nervous system becomes slightly dominant. Breathing shortens and moves higher into the chest. Muscle tone increases just enough to stay ready. Attention narrows toward whatever feels unresolved. At the same time, vagal tone, the signal that tells the body it's safe to relax, drops just below baseline. Nothing dramatic happens. That's why most people miss it. But internally, the operating system changes. In this low-grade stress state, the brain prioritizes threat reduction over integration. Neural resources shift away from creativity, intuition, and long-range pattern recognition, and toward monitoring, prediction, and control. Perception collapses around what hasn't happened yet. Timing becomes reactive, because the system is trying to close uncertainty as efficiently as possible. This is why vigilance often feels productive. You're alert. You're responsive. You're on top of things, but you're no longer coherent. Spiritually, this state is often called misalignment. Scientifically, it's the same thing: a nervous system broadcasting one consistent message, not safe yet. And that message doesn't stay inside the body. It leaks outward through micro-delays, pacing, tone, urgency, and presence. Other people may not consciously detect it, but nervous systems communicate faster than language. They respond to whether someone feels settled in themselves or subtly leaning on an outcome to regulate safety. So reality doesn't resist you, and it doesn't reward or punish desire. It reflects state. When your system is organized around urgency and conditional safety, I'll relax. When this happens, your actions carry a compressed signal. When your system returns to baseline regulation, when vagal tone restores and attention widens, your signal stabilizes, Decisions become cleaner. Timing softens. Interaction becomes less effortful. Not because you stopped wanting, but because your body stopped asking the future to calm the present. When your internal state says, "I'll relax once this arrives," the field hears, "This is not here yet." Effort can't override that signal. Like an instrument tuned too tightly, no amount of striking the strings will create harmony. The tension distorts the sound. Daniel wasn't out of tune because he lacked discipline. He was out of tune because the outcome carried emotional weight. And emotional weight creates interference. When thoughts say, "This will work," but the body says, "I need this to work," the system splits. One part reaches forward, another braces, and the field responds with delay. This pattern shows up everywhere: jobs that almost land, relationships that circle without committing, opportunities that keep saying soon, especially with things that matter deeply. What releases the pattern isn't doing less. It's no longer asking the outcome to regulate your nervous system. The moment the body no longer depends on the result to feel safe, the signal stabilizes. And once Daniel felt that shift, not conceptually, but physically, the question stopped being, "How do I get this to happen?" It became quieter. "Who am I being while I wait?" And that question opens an entirely different door. Daniel didn't announce a change. He didn't make a decision to let go. He didn't even fully trust what he was noticing yet. What he did instead was simpler, almost unremarkable. He stopped asking the outcome to calm him down. The first place this showed up was in his body. When the urge to check his inbox appeared, he didn't fight it. He noticed it, the slight lift in his chest, the forward pull of attention, and instead of acting on it immediately, he let the sensation finish its cycle. It took less than a minute. He realized most urges weren't instructions. They were just signals passing through a nervous system that had been trained to anticipate. Once he stopped obeying them automatically, something softened. His breathing deepened without effort. His shoulders dropped. Not all at once, just enough. He didn't replace the urge with affirmations or positive thinking. He replaced it with presence. Throughout the day, Daniel practiced holding the same tasks from a different place. When he worked on an appraisal, he focused on clarity instead of speed. When he replied to emails, he responded cleanly without adding invisible pressure. No extra justification, no subtle proving, just the work itself. The shift wasn't in what he did, it was in what he no longer added. He also began creating small pockets of neutrality, moments where nothing needed to happen next. Driving without planning the following hour, finishing a report and not immediately moving to the next task. Letting completion actually register in his body before chasing momentum again. At first, this felt unfamiliar, even irresponsible. His mind whispered that stillness meant falling behind. That ease was a luxury reserved for after success arrived. But the body told a different story. The more he allowed space, the steadier he felt. The steadier he felt, the less the future pulled on him. And when the future stopped pulling, the present expanded. This is what embodiment actually looks like. Not pretending you already have something, not acting as if, but stabilizing yourself in a state where the outcome is no longer regulating your nervous system. Daniel wasn't forcing calm. He was allowing his system to return to baseline. And from that baseline, his actions changed naturally. He followed up when it felt clear, not compulsive. He declined rush jobs that didn't align instead of accepting them out of fear. He slept more deeply. He woke without the familiar urgency humming in his chest. None of this felt dramatic, but it felt clean. When people talk about detachment, this is what they often miss. It's not emotional distance. It's removing the invisible contract that says, once this happens, I can finally relax. Daniel broke that contract quietly. And once he did, something subtle shifted in how the world met him. Because when you stop leaning into the future for relief, you stop signaling lack. When your system stabilizes, your timing changes, your presence changes, and the field which is always responding to coherence begins to reorganize. Daniel didn't chase the outcome anymore. He made himself available to it. A week later, the email arrived. Not with fireworks, not with urgency, just a few lines. Written plainly, the bank was ready to move forward. The contract terms were simple. The timeline was clear. Nothing about Daniel's work had changed in those 7 days. The quality was the same. The process was the same. The offer on the table was one he could have received months earlier. What had changed was the space around it. By the time the message appeared, Daniel wasn't waiting anymore. He read it once, not twice. His body didn't spike. His breath didn't catch. There was no rush of relief, no sense of being saved by the outcome, just recognition. This is what it feels like when something arrives from alignment instead of urgency. Most people assume manifestation is about intensity, wanting something badly enough to pull it toward you. But reality doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to coherence. To whether your system is stable enough to hold what you're asking for without gripping it, the less you need the outcome to calm you, the faster it can meet you. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped squeezing. This is why so many things show up the moment you stop trying. Not because effort is wrong, but because effort untangled from need becomes clean. And clean signals move faster. If you've been in a season of waiting, doing everything right, showing up consistently, yet feeling suspended, this isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a signal to look beneath the strategy and notice the state you've been carrying. Ask yourself quietly, what am I gripping right now? What outcome am I asking to regulate my nervous system? Where am I leaning forward instead of standing fully here? You don't have to drop the desire. You don't have to lower the standard. You don't even have to do less. You just have to hold differently. For the next 24 hours, try one simple thing. When you notice the urge to check, push, refresh, or follow up prematurely, pause. Let the urge pass through without obeying it. Feel your body settle back into itself. Let the present moment catch up with you. That pause is not lost time. It's where coherence returns. And when coherence returns, life doesn't need to be chased. It finds you on its own timeline, usually faster than effort ever could. The less you want it, the faster it comes. Not as a rule, but as a reflection. This isn't about getting something faster. It's about becoming someone who can be at ease now, without waiting for the future to fix how they feel. You don't open your hand to lose what matters. You open it so it can finally stay.